What up, brother?
What's going on, brother?
Hey, I appreciate you joining me this evening.
Of course, sir. Not a problem.
For everybody logging on, this is history lesson number 85. I'm with the legendary DJ Skribble, formerly of Young Black Teenagers. Thank everybody for joining us this evening. I don't want to waste any time, Skribble. I want to jump right into it. We're going to do a little history lesson. We're going to go all the way back, and then we're going to catch everybody up on what you are currently doing at the moment.
Absolutely.
But if you could take us back to where you were born and raised.
I was actually born on Otis Air Force Base by default up in Massachusetts. My mom was going to visit my dad while he was in the service, but I'm from Queens. But I was born on Otis Air Force Base, military brat.
What was day in the life for Skribble like as a teenager growing up?
I mean, I started DJing in 1980 when I was 11. So, I mean, it was pretty much from that day forward, just every day in my garage, just practicing DJing, trying to learn my craft and you know, sharpen my skills, and wanted to, you know, this is all I wanted to do with my life at the time. And when I turned 14, I told my parents I was going to a friend's house, and I went up to the Bronx River Projects by myself, little white boy going up to Little Vietnam at the time, and I went up there and said I wanted to meet Africa Bambaataa. And that's how I got to meet, you know, Grand Wizard Theodore and Cold Crush Brothers and Bam, and, you know, and started really my career.
You mentioned some of those earlier pioneers. What were some of your earlier influences growing up during your teenage years?
I mean, but obviously the biggest influence to me growing up with them was, you know, especially moving into the Young Black Teenagers, was Public Enemy, you know, and being part of that whole crew with Hank Shockley and Keith Shockley, you know, Eric Sadler and Chuck and Flav, and being part of that whole movement and getting to tour with them for 5 years was, you know, pretty much how, that's my college. That was my college degree, as I say, was the road.
Firsthand, what was some of your earlier hip-hop memories? Not necessarily the radio, not necessarily TV. What did you see firsthand growing up?
I mean, I so many. I mean, my first really big hip hop memory as a DJ was when I was also 14, and I was playing at this place in Long Island called Roller Castle, and it was like my first gig ever. And Dr. Dre from Dr. Dre, and I love it, East Coast Dr. Dre, Chuck D, Dougie Fresh, LL Cool J, forgot who else was on the bill, and I was opening for Dre, and I was horrible. I sucked. I was terrible. I literally was on maybe like 12 minutes, and they ripped me off. And I'll never forget, because I was in the booth, and Dre was down on the floor, and he just like looked up at me. He's like, "Someday, kid," you know what I mean? And then becoming very good friends with Dre, and how he was so influential in my career, bringing me to Yo MTV Raps, bringing me to Hot 97, and that's how I got to meet Charlie Stetler, who was their manager and became my manager.
Earlier on, would you say DJing was your first introduction to hip hop, or was you a dancer?
No. My first introduction to hip hop, actually, I was a boogie boy. I used to pop and also graffiti. That's how I got the name Skribble. I used to write SKO, S-K-O, and I used to hit the 2s, the 5s, the J's, and a lot of walls and stuff like that. So I was a graffiti artist first and foremost.
Before linking with the Young Black Teenagers and forming that and getting in the game, what kind of dues did you pay earlier on?
I mean, you know, the dues back then, I mean, it's not like today where one press of a button, you're global on the internet. I mean, people had to hear you, and you had to be dope. There was, you know, no getting into a club or getting something. If you didn't have skills, you didn't get on. That was what it was. And you had to be the best of the best, and always be prepared and be at the top of your game at all times. I mean, that was the dues for me. It was like, you know, basement parties, backyard parties, you know, a little stuff here and there when I started to get into some clubs. But it was just making that local celebrity, that local word of mouth, like, yo, oh, Skribble's playing, oh, we got to go see him. You know what I mean?
Before the Young Black Teenagers, was there early projects that you were involved in? Any groups?
No, I was just a DJ, and then, you know, I literally graduated high school in '87, and by '89, I was on my first world tour with EPMD, Public Enemy, We Papa Girls and MC Tragedy,
Okay.
across the country, in a world tour overseas.
Okay, take me back to the puzzle that first formed Young Black Teenagers. Who was the earlier on person
Well,
that formed?
yeah, I mean, there was Gary G. Wiz, who was our manager at the time, and then there was Hank and Keith and Chuck, and they wanted to put a white rap group together. And, you know, originally they wanted us to have Leaders of the New School's name, and they wanted us to battle for the name, but we didn't want their name. There's a big controversy going around, like they battled us for the name and we lost. We never battled Leaders of the New School. You know, we wanted to have our own name, and because of what we stood for and what we were, you know, Hank came up with the Young Black Teenagers.
Did that name create any backlash? What was the reaction from the hip hop community when you guys finally came with the name and the look?
I mean, I remember our first show overseas was the Docklands Arena in England, in London, and they announced us, and everybody went crazy. And then we walked on stage as 5 white guys, and they started throwing stuff at us. We were getting booed. I mean, so everybody was like bugged out, but because, you know, of what we stood for and how we thought hip hop was a state of mind and how we explained everything and what we were, and how we lived this life, you know, it wasn't so much backlash, but people just needed to open up their ears and like listen. And then by the time we got to Germany, the whole persona changed, you know, and people were starting to really get into what we were doing.
Can you take me back? Was there any demos created, or were you guys immediately signed to Hank and
No, we didn't create any demos. We did a lot of rehearsing, but our first stage show was all off of breakbeats before our first album was even done. We had a 12-minute, I think we had like 12 minutes, and me and ATA at the time were both DJing, and we had 27 breakbeats in a 12-minute show. So the stuff was all off of breakbeats, our first show. Before we even did Nobody Knows Kelly.
Were there labels knocking at your door at any point?
We were signed right up with Hank right from the jump. So, you know, when Hank got his deal with Soul MCA, we were immediately, you know, locked to him.
What was it about Hank and that label that was so appealing to you guys that you guys decided to roll with MCA and Soul Records?
Well, I mean, he put us together. You know what I mean? He brought us all together. I was friends with ATA. You know, my sister was dating Firstborn. He knew Tommy Never, and then Hank brought Cameron into the fold. And that's how the group was really created. And for a year and a half, we were just rehearsing and being a group and, you know, messing around. And then we started to work on the album.
Can you remember what you told me what it was like overseas? What was the reaction like to, like, you know, groups like Public Enemy and everybody? What was their reaction to the name and the?
Well, I mean, because we had the backing of Chuck and Public Enemy, you know, I mean, that was a big positive for us. But, you know, people wanted to know what we were about. And once they met us, you know, there was that standoffish thing in the beginning. But once people met us and seen what we were all about, then we were accepted.
Can you take me back to what the game plan was going into your debut album? What did you guys come up with? What was the idea that you guys wanted the public to know about you guys coming out?
I mean, who we really were. I mean, we weren't trying to portray anything that we didn't live every day. You know what I mean? You know, I mean, one of the most controversial records we had on the album was Daddy Called Me Nigga Because I Liked It to Rhyme, which was about Cameron and his upbringing with his dad, and kind of like what my dad was, you know, how they went against what we did because we loved hip hop, you know, and where we were in that time period. And it was these white kids doing rap, and that was like unheard of, you know what I mean? So, you know, we were just also trying to bridge the gap, and, you know, hip hop was a universal thing. It wasn't just for one certain person or one certain group. It was for everybody all over the world.
What advice did the Shockleys share with you guys going into your first album?
You know, Hank was always about being prepared. That was what he was always about, no matter what we did, where we went. You know, if we had a battle, if we had to just go at it, it was always be prepared and always hone your craft. And that was the one thing that I still do to this day, even with DJing, living in both worlds between house music and hip hop.
Can you remember what those sessions were like for your debut album?
I mean, it was at the Music Palace and also Green Street. Well, actually, no, sorry. The first album was mostly done at Green Street Studios in the city. And, you know, being around that, and, you know, this is at the same time they did America's Most Wanted for Ice Cube. So we were in the studio for that, or Belle Biv DeVoe. And then, of course, you know, Fear of a Black Planet. So we were around for all of that. So for me, and being part, every, like, to wanting to be in hip hop and live out every hip hop dream that I've ever could consider or fathom, I've gotten to do that through the start with the YBT. You know, if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't be moved on to do Hot 97, to do MTV, to travel around the world and do all the things that I've gotten to do.
What was that creative process like, going in to work with 4 other members, and you know, were the concepts easy to come up with? Was there disagreements?
Well, you know, it's like anything else. There was always disagreements, but, you know, we were really tight in the fact that, you know, Born and Cam really were the head writers on everything. Everybody wrote their own lyrics, which was great, but Born and Cam really took the lead on a lot of that. And where we would work more with Keith and stuff, and like coming up with the scratches and different things that we wanted to do musically.
You also produced on the album?
I helped do Tap the Bottle, yeah.
Oh, that was the second,
second album. First album, I didn't produce anything on it, no. I did all the scratches and stuff, but not producing. I didn't get into producing more until after the second album.
From start to end, how long do you think it took to create that first album?
Oh shit, now you're dating me. I was at least 1.5 years. Yeah, before it came out and we were all done ready with it.
You remember what the reaction was like when you turned it into the label?
I mean, they loved it. I mean, I remember going out to Cali first when we went over to MCA, and I mean, doing all the like mom and pop record store runs, and, you know, introducing ourselves, and, you know, getting to go on the tours, and how we really, you know, hit the pavement doing show after show after show.
Whose idea was it to redo the Beatles album cover?
That was Hank.
Hank?
Yeah. Hank had a vision. He you know, say what you want about him, but he definitely had the vision for what we want, where we were.
Why only one single for the album?
There was 2. Roll with the Flavor. No, I'm sorry. Proud to Be Black and Nobody Knows Kelly off the first album. Yeah, it was the only single off of that. You're dating me, bro, because it's going back to 30 years ago.
Right. So there was
those 2 off the first album, and then the second album we had Tap the Bottle and then Roll with the Flavor.
Gotcha. Looking back, what was your best memory overall creating that first album?
Just the whole process, you know, and being in the studio. And, you know, obviously at the time, the Bomb Squad was the pinnacle of hip-hop producers, you know, and we were under their wing. So just to be involved with all that, and that creation process, from going from 510 in Hempstead to Green Street, and laying it down and putting it together, and the endless nights of, you know, back then there was no computers. Everything was done with the samplers and tape. So, you know, lots of long hours to do simple productions, but it was a lot more work.
Can you take us back to a great tour memory during the first album, and maybe a great tour lineup that you were on?
I mean, obviously the first tour ever, you know what I mean, which I did, which was Public Enemy, EPMD, We Papa Girls, MC Tragedy, and us. You know, and it was the first time any of us ever left the country, first time any of us, you know, left New York for that matter. And the best memory I have of that is when we got to England and nobody had any money on us. And, you know, we were told, don't say we're performing. We didn't have work visas. We actually got stuck in customs for like 8 hours.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and they were on the phone with Leo Cohen, Russell Simmons, and Hank. And we had all this gear with us, too. And they were like, we don't care what you do with them as long as this gear gets to the arena. And that was kind of the excuse that got us through. But on our passports, it's funny because it's stamped that we had 24 hours to get out of the country. And we couldn't work. But we went straight to the arena, got on stage in the nick of time, and we got booed the whole show. I got hit with a pair of sunglasses. I kept DJing. I didn't care. It was, and, you know, and that's when I realized also, like, booed or not, I'm like, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life.
When that album dropped, what was the reaction from the hip hop community?
We were very positively taken. I mean, we did a lot of talk shows. We did a lot of press. You know, I mean, there was some haters because obviously of what we were calling ourselves, but our skills was what spoke for ourselves. You know, and like I said, at that time, it was all about being dope, and you couldn't deny that. You know what I mean?
Right. After the album did its thing, it took about 2 years to drop your sophomore album. Where does YBT find itself in those 2 years between albums?
We were just touring. I mean, we were touring. We did that first tour, and then we did the Sisters of Mercy tour with Chuck and Public Enemy. So we were doing like these hybrid rock rap tours before it was the cool thing to do back in 89 and 90, you know. And then when we went back into the studio to create the second album, obviously we were a lot more polished. You know, we were on the road for so long, and, you know, we got to work with Grandmaster Flash and, you know, and Hank and the Bomb Squad again. And it was just, you know, Terminator X came up with that beat for Tap the Bottle, and then the rest was history.
Looking back, were you pleased overall with that first album?
I was proud of it. Of course, I was proud of it because, you know, it was so new to us. You know what I mean? There was other singles that I would have picked first before Nobody Knows Kelly, but overall, I was happy with our first, you know, release. You know, and I would have rather have Proud to Be Black be the lead single. You know, that's what I really wanted to have us as the lead, but that became the B-side.
Going into that second album, what adjustments did DJ Skribble make, and what did he learn from the first album going into the second album?
Well, going into the second album, obviously we lost Tommy Never. ATA moved up to the MC spot, and I was the DJ. So, you know, one of the adjustments made was to obviously for the live shows was to showcase my skills and my talents and bring that to the table as a whole stage show. Because that's what we love to do the most. Our stage shows we created all on our own, you know, and put them together between Cam and Bourne and myself and ATA, and really honed that and wanted to still have that old, at that time we were still calling it old school, but that really crew feel where we're all feeding off of each other, you know, and that's how we wanted to take our careers musically as well. And if you hear that a lot on the second album, a lot of, you know, ad-libbing and a lot of, like, you know, around each other.
Why did Tommy end up leaving the group?
He just didn't want to do it no more. So he left. You know?
Right. First, your deal with Soul, was that also MCA, or did we get to...
It was Soul MCA, yes.
Okay. So,
Bill Stephanie and Hank Shockley.
Going back to your deal, what was that originally for? Was that a multi...
it was a multi-album deal. And, I mean, we were the typical cliche at the time. We got a lot more money for the album than that we were given, unfortunately. But, you know, we had to pay our dues, and that's just the way it was.
As a group, what was the game plan going into the second album to ensure that it wasn't going to be a sophomore jinx?
We were a lot more, you know, tighter as a group to begin with, and we were also, you know, polished a lot more on all our skills and where we were going, and we were able to take over a lot more creatively than the first album.